That we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. My name is Ronald Servant, and I'm a longtime member of the party in Canada Carleton, and I will be your host tonight for this event. Welcome, Judy. It's a pleasure to see you. Let me first say a few words about Judy's bio. Judy was born in British Columbia and has lived and worked in 5 provinces. She started her career as an airframe technician with the Canadian Armed Forces and raised her family while completing an honors degree in computer science from Acadia University. While completing her master's of computer science from Carleton University, Judy worked on cutting-edge high-tech solutions and went on to own and operate 4 vastly different small businesses. In 2014, Judy returned to Nova Scotia, the home province of her husband of 37 years. And last year, she went from presenting the Heading Towards Extinction seminars from XR to running for the Green Party of Canada in West Nova. She finished third, earning 12.69% of the vote, more than tripling Green support and winning the student vote. Judy and her husband have a son and 3 grandchildren. I'm sure I could say 3 beautiful grandchildren and I wouldn't be wrong.
You got that right, Ron.
Excellent. The format for tonight will be an opening statement from Judy, and then we'll go into a Q&A, and Judy, you can choose to respond to any question as long as you want. So no enforced time limits here. So I'll turn it over to you for your opening statement.
Thank you, Ron. Well, thank you for that great introduction. I'd also like to add that I'm coming to you from Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people here in Nova Scotia. And our treaty here is called a Peace and Friendship Treaty, which is a little different than the numbered treaties. But I always encourage people to read those treaties and truly understand what our rights and responsibilities are with those treaties so that we can build on that relationship. Yes, I'm fairly new to politics. Oftentimes, I've had a campaign manager actually said that I didn't necessarily choose politics, that politics has chosen me, and the Green Party is an excellent fit. I've been working behind the scenes with a number of grassroots groups within the party to work for strengthening our transparency and the grassroots, activating our grassroots and our membership on the ground. And so when Elizabeth May stepped down, I felt that those skills weren't being represented with the people that were at that point in time being suggested. Many of them were outside the party, and I'm a big believer in growing our leadership from within. And I thought that we really weren't looking at our own members and our own former candidates who really can step up. And I think our 10 candidates that are now before you are a good indication that we can do just that. So I just would love to take your questions, and nothing's off limits. And I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you so much for having me here tonight.
Thank you, Judy. Our first question comes from Johan, and I'll read it in French and repeat it in English if you'd like. Comment vous allez créer une vraie culture de bilinguisme dans notre parti? How will you create a true culture of bilingualism in our party?
Well, you know, an Anglophone can't do that alone. We have to work in partnership with the Francophone branch of the party. That really needs to be activated and strengthened. It's still there in name and in some aspects, but it really needs to be strengthened and brought into a form that's going to serve the needs of the Francophones throughout Canada. And that's not just in Quebec, it's also our New Brunswick Francophones and Acadian Francophones here throughout the Atlantic provinces. So it's really important to understand the different communities and the history involved in Francophone, being a Francophone in Canada. It's not a single story. It's multiple stories from multiple groups of people who have a French heritage. And it's important that we represent that within the party. And I've always been so frustrated with not having the translation on our Green Party documents and our website up to the standards that are required and really need to be there. So I'd really like to work more with Francophones in all the provinces to ensure that their needs are being met and that they truly feel a part of the party, because we need their voices heard.
Thank you, Judy.
And I just want to also add, I've never had the opportunity to learn French or in a way that I lived somewhere where I could use it. So any French that I had learned, I quickly lost. But I am making the effort to get my French skills up there. I can translate and I can understand, but I'm not at a point where I can truly have a cognizant conversation without embarrassing myself or those who are listening to me at this point. But I am working on it.
Excellent. Our next question comes from James. What sets you apart from the other candidates?
I think the biggest thing that sets me apart from the other candidates is I'm really non-traditional. I come from military background, which isn't often associated with a green outlook, and with our nonviolence as being one of our core principles. But we really came from a time when peacekeeping was at the height of the pride of the Canadian military, and I think we need to go back to that. And I have a whole platform on our military and how we should be treating them. But I look at things differently. I am an entrepreneur. I look at it from that perspective, being very planning things out, being visionary, looking at what the future is, looking at what steps we need to take to get there, and very strategic and very collaborative. My leadership style is very much leading from within and empowering those around me, growing leaders. My success will be based on how well I prepare people to take over my job.
Excellent. Thank you, Judy. Our next question is from Erwin. Is your top priority to get at least a dozen MPs elected? And if so, how do you plan to achieve that?
I would love to get 14. That's kind of my goal for the next election, is to get 14 elected. If you look, the leadership contestants that we have right now, in theory, we could easily, by the time the next election rolls around, have all 10 elected. The profiles that everybody is getting, the opportunity to speak in front of Canadians, I think we're already starting to get some interest in that. We're not the same type of party as another leadership contest that's going on right now. We really are walking our talk in terms of our collaborative nature and really looking at the goals that are out there in our focus for the future. So we need to activate our membership on the ground. We need to not have people feeling like they are in their own little silos, left to their own devices, and not having the skills or training that they need in order to attract volunteers, engage them, train them, and have them ready for elections. We have to be working on that in between elections. We need to be actively working, not just on autopilot between elections. We need to be working between elections, getting out into those underrepresented communities within each of our ridings that we need to take time to develop authentic relationships with, helping them. They're already growing leaders in those communities. We need to get in there and speak with them, find where we align our green principles, align with that community, and hopefully convince some of those growing leaders to become green leaders and join us in the party. And that takes time, because that's an authentic relationship. We need to be earning back the trust of the electorate. So many people who are disenfranchised and don't even vote anymore have lost faith. They don't trust politicians. And the only way that we can earn that trust back is by building relationships over time, by being true to our principles and listening to them, which is a very novel thing in an election campaign, is to actually listen to people. We ran a listening campaign and it was exceptionally effective. And we didn't get to near the number of doors that we needed to because we didn't have enough volunteers. We started with 0 in June and we did phenomenally well, but we have a lot more that we can do if we have more boots on the ground, which is what we're actively working on between elections here in West Nova. And I'd like to see that happening with some guidance and training. In talking to people across Canada, I am just amazed at the wealth of information and the depth of knowledge that are represented in our Green Party volunteers and members. And many of them have expressed to me that they would love to be doing seminars and teaching about volunteer management, about marketing in a local EDA, and what you should be looking at, and how how people respond to different messaging, even on social media and Facebook. Like, these are all skills that we can all be learning between elections, but we need to be actively working on that. We need a plan to make sure that those resources roll out in a way that are usable by the membership. And I would love to do to have mentors, to have either mentors from existing EDAs, or perhaps members who have been very active in the Green Party, have that institutional knowledge, may not be having the energy to do or wanting to step back from an elected position at this point in time in their EDA, but have that knowledge. They may want to connect with another EDA that just needs an ear to help them really tap into that institutional knowledge, not make the same mistakes everyone else has made, and to be able to kind of leapfrog ahead in their development. And I think that that's something that we really need to do. I would love to see a version of that with young Greens and new volunteers as well, so that they are not feeling like there's so much on their own. So there's a lot that we can do in between elections that will help us grow that vote and help our EDAs to be prepared for the next election long before it starts. And that includes choosing our candidates early, so that gives them time to build up those relationships within their EDAs and their communities with the green mantle of a candidate on them, which gives them access to things that somebody who doesn't have that mantle may not have.
Excellent. All right, shifting gears a little bit, our next question comes from Mark. He would like to know what your foreign policy stance is, in particular with dealing with countries like China, Russia, and the US.
Now, our foreign policy, and I have to admit, foreign policy is probably one of my weakest portfolios, but when I look at it and I look at the history of how Western countries have influenced or interfered in developing countries and in oil-rich countries, I think we need to step back and we need to really look at this. We're not being fair and equitable in how we apply sanctions or how we apply influence, and we're also caving on human rights issues where we really can't. We either, as Canadians, we either adhere to, the UN human rights minimum levels of human rights behavior across the globe, or we don't. And so I find it very disturbing, and I hear this from voters all the time. Why are we supporting countries that have horrendous human rights records, and yet we have trading deals with them? I mean, what comes to mind is Saudi Arabia, with the military vehicles that we sell over there. They're behind on payments on top of it all. Why are we continuing to do this? It's like we're giving a friends and family discount to certain ones because of those trade relationships. And that's disingenuous to me. And we have to be looking at the way we apply sanctions. So if there are human rights abuses in one country and we want to apply sanctions there, well, then we have to look, well, are those going on in another country? And the two that really come to mind are in Israel with Palestine and in China with Tibet. And we're not looking at China and Tibet with the same lens as we are with Israel and Palestine. And I think we need to start being more equitable with across the board in terms of our international relationships. And with our military, we have to be less eager to go in with force in any other country. We should be there for humanitarian reasons, for providing food on the ground, making sure there's water and wells and fresh water for the people, support for the people in other countries as well as in our own, of course. But I have really lost my taste for any kind of Canadian military involvement with NATO or any of the organizations that we're involved with, because they've changed over time. And it's no longer about defense. It's about strategic influence on countries for reasons of profit, not for reasons of human rights or doing what is the right thing ethically.
Excellent. So we'll stay in this theme as we've received a few questions on it. Next, we'll go to Megan's question. Could you tell us what the Green Party's current position on Israel is in the context its bid to annex even more of the Palestinian occupied territories, and your personal position on this issue?
Well, I think we just recently put out a release saying that we are absolutely against the annexation of the occupied territory of Palestine. I totally agree with that position. This should have come out stronger earlier on. This has been a creeping degradation of rights of the Palestinian people. Our hope that there would be a two-party solution in Israel with Palestine is eroding every day. And the existing sanctions are on the Israeli-made goods that are made in the occupied territories, that they be labeled. And there's ongoing problems with that because they're continuing to label them as products of Israel and not being truthful in where they're actually being made.
All right.
And that's one of the circumstances that I'm talking about. If we have trade sanctions on Israel, then we need to be looking at Tibet and other areas where we have a similar imbalance of power within the same region. And there are now international laws that preclude gaining land because of acts of war. And so I would be very interested to know exactly where this annexation of Palestine falls on that spectrum, because I suspect that it is quite illegal.
Thank you. Andrew writes or asks, what are your thoughts on the failed UN Security Council seat? Was it a good or bad idea to spend tax dollars in this manner? In what lessons do you believe we learned from this endeavor?
Well, I think that, starting later than the other two very deserving candidates for that seat was misguided to begin with. The very fact that we haven't implemented the UNDRIP for the Indigenous people, we haven't done that. We are way behind on human rights issues, even here in Canada. How can we put ourselves forth to be leaders in that area when and to be talking about and imposing these things on other countries when we're not doing the work here in Canada at all? So I'm not surprised that we didn't win that seat. I'm quite discouraged that much Canadian taxpayer money was spent on that when it was a long shot to begin with. And I'm sure there are other nuanced reasons for doing it, but on the surface, I think that it was a little bit a Hail Mary pass that we would get this, and I don't think that that's where taxpayer money needs to be spent when we have so much that needs to be done here in Canada.
Thank you. Now shifting perhaps a more inward focus, what challenges and opportunities do you see for the Green movement as we confront and address this pandemic? And that question was from Jason.
Awesome. Jason, this is a unique time in history. The experts are telling us that we have a very narrow window. People have changed their habits and their routines because of COVID-19. They're now listening to the medical experts. There's a very narrow window that we can activate that so that they will start listening to the climate science experts. So science reigns right now. We need to kind of work on that wave. There's some very interesting articles about, we can look at COVID-19 as a hole that we can fall into, or we can look at it as a portal that we can move through into something better. And one of the really neat things is if you look back on our 2019 platform, the planks on that platform are uniquely designed to get us back on a road to recovery for COVID-19 in the same ways they would get us onto a road of recovery and a redirection for clean energy and a clean energy transition. And we need to be really, I almost feel like that it's saying, okay, we've been practicing for this forever, send us in, coach, we're ready. So it's really critical that we don't waste time. We need to be really bringing these points up, that these are the solutions. It's a way of reframing our solutions for climate change as solutions for COVID-19. But I would also caution that we need to be looking at a different version of economics. Capitalism is not serving us. Unfettered growth on a finite planet is ludicrous. I'm actually quite a fan of the donut model of the economics, where you have the inner ring and the outer ring, and the inner ring is the lower boundary of basic human needs, and we want to make sure everybody's out of that hole and into the ring so that nobody is short on basic human needs. But the outer ring is a constraint based on what the planet is able to support. And there's a number of different areas all around that, including climate change. Just as inside the ring, there's a number of areas around there, including poverty and homelessness, and our housing policies, our guaranteed livable income, genuine progress indicators instead of GDP, all map completely very well to this model that came out in 2012. And I'm just learning about it myself. I've read a little bit about it in the past, but I'm doing a bit more of a deep dive because it does map so nicely to the policies that members have developed independent of this model, which I always find fascinating when there's a convergence of minds, of people who are looking at the holistic view, and the membership who are looking at individual solutions to problems, and then there's a convergence. And I think we're seeing that with the Green Party policy and the donut economic model.
All right, let us move on to the next question. You touched on this in your previous answer, but I'd like you to expand on how you would convince voters that a guaranteed livable income is required to start leveling the playing field in socio-economic dynamics in our country. That question is from Christine.
Excellent. Well, the CERB and the programs that the Liberals have brought in right now are really doing the work for us. They're illustrating how problematic the mindset is that you can fit people into little boxes and expect that everybody will fit into one of your boxes. There's always someone who's going to fall through the cracks, that we need to be looking at something more far-reaching, that's more flexible and resilient, that we had guaranteed livable income in place prior to this pandemic, we wouldn't have had the scramble that we do now. We wouldn't have as many people who are still worried about losing their housing. That's becoming another, we're at the end of the 4 months of CERB. There's a lot of people who don't know that they're going to get to that extension of CERB or be able to find work, because now they're saying between 30 and 40% of the jobs that are lost will be gone forever. And that's a huge number. So we really need to be looking at that. We're going to have similar upsets in our labor force with an upswing in automation, and the way our economy will shift and change because of what's happening with COVID-19. And if we have another pandemic, as the experts say are likely to be coming in future, we need to future-proof. And so we need to take the lessons from COVID-19 now in our socioeconomic problems that are really being illustrated by the pandemic right now, and show that the solutions need to be more broad. They can't be means testing for them. It should be a basic right in Canada that your basic needs are met, and that there is still incentive to find gainful employment that is challenging and is beneficial for you and the country. So it's and the stats are there. And the thing is that the Green Party tends to be, and I myself, I'm a recovering academic, we tend to be all about the facts. And unfortunately, the facts aren't going to be what change people's minds. We need to find a way of messaging all of these facts and the truths that we know to be true in a way that people can react to emotionally, because that's how we're going to elicit that change. I always remind myself that people don't necessarily remember what you tell them, but they do remember how you made them feel. And I think that's something we really need to understand as Greens when we're trying to get our campaign messages across, and when we're trying to describe things like guaranteed livable income, which is not a simple, when you get into the details, it's just like proportional representation. There's many different versions of it that could be workable for us. I like the form that we have with the Green Party, with the guaranteed livable income that is based on the market basket model or poverty line in each area, so that it's more equitable across the board. But we need to be flexible, but we need to have better messaging for getting across these ideas that we have a lot of science and evidence behind. But we need to find the best way to language that, so that that people who have never voted Green before will understand that this is the best solution right now. And the appetite for guaranteed livable income right now is more than it's ever been. So one way we can help is to really be partnering with, there's a number of, like, there's UBI, there's a couple of different groups that are working hard with the guaranteed some form of basic income. If we could leverage our messaging to work with theirs, then we would get a wider reach.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to our next topic. And this question comes from Andrew. How do we unite all the provinces towards the GPC, especially with such deep division seen between West and East provinces in the last election?
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to have to come one EDA at a time, one person at a time. You have to influence people through relationships and through trust. And that comes with those face-to-face experiences and getting out there, in our ridings, in our communities, just doing things that are green, participating in events that other organizations are doing that also support what we are about, planting trees, doing beach cleanups, those are the obvious ones, but there's lots of other groups and activities that are happening all across Canada that we can be there and be talking about and promoting, because it is, part of what we believe is going to be the transformation that we need moving forward. And not be afraid to do that. Giving somebody else a little press is not a bad thing. It raises our profile as well, and it helps build relationships with people within those organizations. I was very disappointed, as I'm sure many of you were as well, that we did not get the votes from the people who we marched beside for all of those Fridays for Future and the XR events that happened all throughout the last election period. And we just did not seem to capture those votes. And quite honestly, other parties didn't either. There was a lot of those votes that were never cast. So we haven't convinced the people who are most aligned with our beliefs in terms of climate change sorry, that is Cindy. She is singing you the song of her people. She will stop in a minute. She's my little, she's a little mixed breed, Yorkie and Pomeranian cross. She's a little rescue. So we need to be, making those connections on the ground in order to build that trust right across Canada. Because, there's so much rhetoric out there, and the people who are so far to the left, especially in Alberta, they're feeling that if you listen to some of people's comments, and I'm talking about the bots, I'm talking about real live people who are on Twitter, there are a few of them, and they are afraid that what we want to do is going to make them lose their jobs, lose their livelihood. We need to really get through to them that that's not what we're after. That's not the goal. And we are aware that they're afraid of that. And I would be too, that we have to make sure that everybody understands it's not an us versus them. It's not divisive. You know, now more than ever in Canada, we need to have unity. We need to have everybody pulling in the right direction. I don't have to tell anybody in the Green Party that we don't have a lot of time. You know, we honestly don't have a lot of time with climate change. And even now we're having to change some of our messaging towards adaptation and mitigation, because we're losing time to be able to avoid the worst of what's to come. We've already bought and paid for the next 20, 30 years of increase in temperatures and all that goes along with that. So we have to be working both at stopping digging stuff out of the ground and burning it, but we also have to be looking at how to help all Canadians land softly in what's coming through, you know, the pandemic as well as through climate change. Because, you know, the media hasn't been talking about climate change, but climate change hasn't stopped. It's continuing just as rapidly as it was previously. Just because the media isn't paying any attention to it again doesn't mean it's gone away. And unfortunately, I think that's where some people's minds are. So we have to and unfortunately, climate change has become politicized rather than being the facts about the reality that if we don't get this under control, you know, society, I mean, the earth will carry on, but society as we know it, you know, civility is a very thin veneer on top of our cities and countries. And it won't take a lot for that to fall away. So we want to avoid that at all costs. And we need to be acting quickly and boldly to make that happen. So it's about those conversations one-on-one. It means that each and every one of us needs to be out there. We need to be talking to people. We need to be encouraging them to join us in these dialogues and these discussions. And if, you know, if you tell two people, they tell two people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to have to be really, it has to be a grassroots effort. You know, there's not enough money in the world to be able to educate people with the media campaigns as fast as we need that to happen, and as deeply as we need people to get this message.
Let's pick up on one of the things you touched on in that answer, and that's a transition from oil and gas to other methods. So a question from Megan. The Just Transition talks a lot about transitioning oil and gas workers or about having shovel-ready infrastructure projects. Both of these relate primarily to male workers, again, leaving women out of the economic picture. How do you think the Green Party can better address the needs of women in both the post-COVID recovery and in the just transition away from fossil fuels?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's true, because those industries that are most feeling the pinch right now are predominantly male. They're not exclusively male, but they are predominantly. They still need to have that transition, but we also need to start, continue actually, because there has been some uptake of encouraging women to enter into the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math roles. Because that's really going to be what leads us in the future. So that needs to continue. We need to also be doing, I think, with COVID-19, it's really shown that healthcare is another area that we need to reinvest in and ensure that we have the capacity and the flexibility to ramp up when we need to, as we are like during a pandemic, but also then be able to reallocate resources when that need isn't quite as high. So I think there's a lot of things in the future that we're going to have to be looking at, cross-training people, having people having, and many people already have these skills. You know, I think it's at least six different careers people have in the course of a lifetime now. And they're often very, very different. So we have to be careful not to assume that people don't have those skills. For myself, I was an aircraft mechanic. So I have those kind of skills, as well as software engineering, as well as, I mean, I'm a published author. So there's all sorts of different skills people have, and finding ways to be able to leverage those in ways that are going to best serve the economy and the local communities as we go further. I'd really like to see more, less centralization. have more decentralization, more resilience in terms of businesses, as well as energy production as well, which opens doors a little more to women. Oftentimes women are not as comfortable leaving the family for long periods of time to work in other provinces, which unfortunately has been the model for a lot of the oil and gas workers.
Thank you. Let's touch on oil and gas and carbon pricing. Hans asks, there was a discussion on carbon pricing policy in the TVO debate. What is your position on this issue?
I actually am much more a fan of the fee and dividend because people see the result. They get a check back in their hand. They know that it's not coming out of their pocket. When it's explained how it works, there is that pressure on the big emitters to reduce their emissions. Here in Nova Scotia, they chose to do a cap and trade, but they implemented it exceptionally badly. 70% of the worst emitters, the top 3 emitters, 70% of their fee or their dividends that they were, pardon me, what their carbon credits, their carbon credits were given to them for free for the first 4 years. So essentially stopped any incentive whatsoever for them to keep their emissions down for the first 4 years, which is infuriating because that didn't need to happen. You know, there is models where that has worked fine, but when you start giving away carbon credits for free, you completely hamstring the whole system. The sad point is now is that with even the fee and dividend, the fees per per unit are having to get extremely large in order to be as effective as we need them to be right now. We have frittered away a lot of our time. If we'd started this 10, 20 years ago, it would have been more reasonable and ramped up slowly. I think we need other tools to leverage that transition as well. And with people understanding that it's not just about transitioning to clean energy, we have to also look at our own usage and our consumerism and how much everything that we buy has a carbon cost. And I think that we should consider having that publicly available so that people have that information that, okay, if I'm buying this, it's costs this much in carbon to produce it. This one over here is that much in carbon to produce it, and then have that be part of that purchasing decision. Because I think people do care. It's very complex, and a lot of people don't understand and have no idea or the skills to be able to go and find that information. So yeah, we're going to have to go beyond just the carbon pricing, but the carbon pricing is definitely one tool that needs to be in place.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question from Murray. Given the tremendous exodus of Canadian manufacturing and business opportunities to offshore locations, how do you see yourself as leader of the Green Party of Canada championing the reparation of business and domestic source goods within this country with a lasting self-sufficiency and increased employment?
Well, I think that we're seeing this in more and more now as being a negative thing. There's always been some people that wanted to keep the jobs in Canada, and others always looked at the bottom line to have the lowest pricing because of the low wages in other countries. We have to look at what the full cost of what our activities are, and sometimes that's not taken into account. So even the traveling back and forth, what is the cost associated with that? What subsidies does this industry have? That's a cost that taxpayers are paying, so that's part of our cost as well. As a consumer, that is part of your cost. You may not see it directly out of your pocket, but it's coming out of your pocket through your taxes. So there really needs to be a reinvigoration of local, and I think we're seeing some appetite for that. With COVID-19, it's shown that especially things that are critical, such as food and personal protective equipment, that we need to have better control of those supply chains, that we can't necessarily trust that international supply chains are going to keep going during crises such as a pandemic or global warming. So we need to be doing that having more support for that locally. The government needs to be on board for that. I would love to see more subsidies for small local run businesses that are employing locals to do manufacturing in Canada versus any kind of subsidies going to multinational corporations that have their head offices offshore, and certainly any that aren't even paying taxes in Canada, such as the e-commerce or the companies such as Netflix and you know, Amazon and those. So we really need to make that a priority and keep those jobs in Canada, keep that innovation in Canada as well. I would really like to see a lot of support for science and technology innovation. We used to be leaders in the world, and we had organizations that kind of shared that brain trust with the world in terms of science and technology innovations, and then those supports have been shut down over the years with the preceding governments. We need to really look at doing that as well, and keeping those the best and brightest here in the country, keeping people employed in the country. And you know, it may mean that things do cost a little bit more for some things, but doesn't necessarily mean that we need 10 or 100 of them. We may only need 2 or 3 of them. So consumer habits may change somewhat, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing.
Excellent, thank you. In continuing this theme, monopolies, Andrew asks, as a Nova Scotian, you've probably seen what a widespread monopoly like the Irvings have on the economy and that impact there. What do you plan to do to make business more equitable for new businesses wanting to build themselves in this country in the face of some of those monopolies?
Well, you know, you would never know that we actually have laws against monopolies. You would never know it because of the way the businesses have grown, and oligopolies as well are just as bad. You know, I think we're seeing overarching themes here in terms of capitalism that is always the larger companies are eating up the smaller companies just to get larger, and the wage equity gap gets bigger and bigger all the time, with more and more income going to the owners or the shareholders of those large companies, and less going into the pockets of the workers. That whole model has to stop. You know, that is not building Canada the way it needs to go. We really need to be supporting those small independent businesses. You know, I've run for small businesses myself, so I understand what like micro businesses are, and and this is one of the things that I think is really falling through with the CERB and that sort of thing too, is that the government, current government, doesn't even understand how many people have created jobs that employ themselves and maybe 1 or 2 other people, or they may work with, you know, subcontracting and that sort of thing. People are very, very creative, but there's no support for them at that level. The support seems to be the governments want to go after the low-hanging fruit. We only have 1 contract, we deal with it with 1 person, multi-billion dollars, yeah. But the reality is that we need systems in place to be supporting those small and medium-sized businesses that are working in our local communities, keeping the commerce within the country. These big international companies, and also a lot of these like the Irvings, they have a lot of money that's stored offshore. It doesn't go back in the local economy. It gets siphoned off into basically a pocket somewhere that we don't see again in our economy, and that doesn't help our local economies thrive. We need businesses, also I would say co-ops and social enterprises in our local areas or local communities to be supported by government so that they can provide good challenging jobs, fulfilling jobs for local people to be able to keep them in their communities, have the profits going back into the communities, and it will grow from there. I kind of call it a trickle-up economy as opposed to trickle-down. We know trickle-down doesn't work. It's actually quite a fallacy, and we need to be looking at a trickle-up economy, and that means keeping Canadians at work in the towns where they want to live, not necessarily having to travel all over the country if they don't want to in order to work.
Excellent, thank you. Let's shift gears now to recent social unrest, protests that have been occurring to highlight the Black Lives Matters movement, to injustices to Indigenous people. And one of the common refrains has been to defund the police. What does defund the police mean to you? Do you support it? How would you implement it? That question comes from me.
Okay, excellent. Well, when I first heard the term, I was a little taken aback. Like, don't we need the police? And I think you're probably hearing that kind of response a lot. I think that the name is a little unfortunate because people do have that response to it. But when you start digging deeper into it, when you look at what the proponents of defund the police are really talking about, they're talking about a reallocation of funds. They're talking about putting money towards the prevention in the community, so that people aren't in a situation where they are in communities that are more likely to be generating a crime. And so part of the problem is that we don't, in Canada, I guess in the Western world, really, we don't look at prevention. We look at Band-Aid solutions, especially in politics. We don't look at upstream thinking and looking at, okay, well, if we eliminate poverty, we have schools so people are educated and they don't have to pay for it. We make sure everybody has fresh water, they have nutritious food and a roof over their head. The stats show us that by providing those things, the crime rates go down dramatically, as does addiction, as does mental health challenges. All of those things go down when you provide the basic necessities of life. And if I remember when I was talking about the donut model, that inner circle, that is all of those issues. If we can address all of those issues in a preventative form, we have a far less need for police. We will always have the need for a tactical squad or unit, because there will always be people within our society that want to do bad things, and we need to have police ready to address that. But we don't. I think it's unfortunate that we train our police officers to deal with criminals, and then we ask them to do things that really are outside of what that training is. And I liken it to, we train them how to use a hammer, and crime is a nail. And so to them, their only tool is a hammer, so everything looks like a crime. Now, some police are able to navigate that quite nicely. Some police officers, I do applaud them, but it's the system itself that is not quite doing what it needs to be. We're increasingly militarizing our police, and I'm totally against that. Here in Halifax, we had a big, the city had wanted to buy the police a big armored vehicle. I think it was like $500,000, and there was a big outcry. And I added my voice to that as well. And they've rolled back that decision. And what they've done instead, ties right back into your question, is that the money that they had allocated for this military style assault vehicle for their police, they have rolled into exactly these kinds of community-led preventative programs in Halifax. And I think they're going to get a lot more bang for their buck by doing that, and solving some of the problems at the root. So when that happens, there's going to be a natural reduction in the necessity for the type of police force we have right now. Our police force can evolve to perhaps not even necessarily having to have a weapon on them, unless they're being called to certain types of calls, or that they have a backup with a weapon. I would love to see teams that go in that are multidisciplinary, that have a social worker in certain circumstances, especially those wellness checks. That we've had 2 deaths very recently in our region because of wellness checks that went horribly wrong. We there's so much that needs to be done. There absolutely is issues with systemic racism. The fact that we struggle with even defining what that is tells me that we have a lot more work for each of us to do. And as a white woman, I've really had to learn how white privilege I have white privilege. And I really struggled with that at first because I didn't come from a financially privileged background. I came from very, very meager means. And, but I've come to understand that has nothing to do with it. It really has to do with the fact that the system was designed for people like me. You know, the system was designed for white men and for white women. We've been struggling within that system ourselves, but we need to be looking at these systemic ways of some of our institutions. And, you know, some of those institutions may not survive this. You know, they may have to be torn down and rebuilt in a different form, you know, just like with the Canadian military, the airborne, was it airborne? I can't remember now. In Somalia, the group that was there that was doing some horrible things, it was completely disbanded in Canada. And we have a joint task force now that took their place and don't have the same problems, but are doing the same sorts of functions that we needed them to do. So we may be looking at that in some of our institutions, like the RCMP. So I think we have to be open to what it's going to take to root out that systemic racism and to ensure that Black lives really do matter. And, you know, we've had in Halifax, the Halifax police have just recently stopped doing street checks because they were so horrendously racist and biased, and really ended up having a lot more people of color going into the legal system that really shouldn't have been there. You know, the things that they were getting pulled in for really were minor, and had it been a white person, chances are that they wouldn't have got called in at all, and that sort of thing has to absolutely stop. So we really have to take a hard look at ourselves in the mirror, and that's not really easy sometimes, but you know, there's lots of ways to do it. When I've been chatting with some other groups, I've given them some resources for having a book club and reading some of the recommended books to learn about Black issues within the United States and Canada. And they are a little bit different between Canada and the US, but there is still the same roots there, as well as our relationships with First Nations are just as problematic here in Canada as the legal or the policing with Black communities and people of color as well.
Excellent. We're within about 8 minutes of our time this evening. I'm going to ask at least one more question, and then I'd like to give you, Judy, the opportunity to formulate a closing statement. So I want to make sure that we have enough time for you to capture that.
Sure.
But the next question is from Mark, and it's a very simple question. How would you characterize your leadership style?
My leadership style is very much leading from within. It's a lot about delegating. It's about building people up, providing the resources that they need to succeed. It's about looking at the whole system and structure to make sure that everybody has what they need and we've got the key people in the right positions. It is very much about empowering people, about getting out in the EDAs. And this is one of the things I'm loving doing these talks, is because I get a chance to kind of plant some seeds as to what EDAs can do in between elections and where to look for more resources. And it really is about working as a team together. And you know, if I do my job right, then we grow the replacements for each of us. As we go. There's no holding on to power. There's no, you know, wanting to consolidate from the top down. It's very much bottom up leadership style.
Excellent, thank you. All right, let us move into another question on green energy. This is from Christine. How would you communicate or form your message to convince voters that moving to green energy production ought to be a non-negotiable point now?
Well, you know, especially with our more conservative voters, right now the buy-in, the money cost is so much in favor of green energy that traditional really isn't keeping up with it at all, and we're continuing to have gains. So even coaching it in the way of what it costs per kilowatt hour, and what the benefits are going to be to them, because that's what people want to hear. We need to look at the far-reaching, making sure that there's a coast-to-coast grid of energy, that we have ways of leveling out the peak usage and that sort of thing. But for the average person, they want to know how it's going to impact their pocketbook, and explaining to them that you're going to have more resilient energy. If it's local, decentralized, and distributed across a robust power grid across Canada, that means that it'll be faster times when your power does go out, faster to get it back up, that you have a lot more resiliency. It's less likely to go out in the first place, that you may have the opportunity to even work in that facility. And it's not polluting, it's not contributing to climate change, and the profits are going back into your economy. So I think we have to get better about talking to people about how these solutions are going to affect them directly.
Excellent. All right. Let's, a little bit in the same vein, a question from Kyle. Given that climate change is an international crisis, how would you propose to work with Green and other progressive movements around the world to tackle this challenge?
I love that. We have the opportunity, and a lot of people don't even realize that we're hooked into this whole green global network. We really need to leverage that more, and to really reach out. I would love to see twinning, how we have EDAs in Canada twinned with EDAs in different countries around the world that are greens, and really to build those relationships. I just thought of that. I think that's a great idea, because we know they're out there. We have a meeting coming up with one of the leaders of the New Zealand Greens. It's going to be, I think it was Megan Ardike who organized that. I could be wrong, but that's coming up shortly. And we need to be doing more of that sort of thing, so that we have those connections and we make those relationships with them, paying attention to what's going on in the different countries as well. I'm working with a group that's looking at some co-leadership and how that's handled in Germany and in New Zealand. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have this amazing network across the country, across the globe, that has been working on some of these very issues that we're delving into ourselves. And so we can really leverage that, but we need to have a better communication network with them, and really reach out and have something formalized, so that the average Green can reach out and be involved with connection with Green members from all around the world. I think there is there's a few people who have those great connections and pull that together, but we need to expand that.
Excellent. Thank you, Judy. And so I want to thank you for answering all of our questions this evening, and give you a final opportunity to maybe make a closing statement, summarize your thoughts, maybe address a topic that we haven't touched on.
Sure. Thanks, Ronald. Yeah, and that's great. Look at that in time too. I get excited about topics and talk on and on and on. So I've tried to be succinct tonight. I'm just really loving this opportunity to get out and speak with Greens all across Canada. And thank you all for coming tonight. Merci beaucoup. It has been always wonderful. I'd like you to reach out to me if you're interested. My website is my name, judyngreen.com, and you can see what the upcoming events are, a little bit more about me. There's been a few lovely Greens who've had a few kind words to say about me, and have the opportunity to interact on social media or sign up for our newsletter as well. And of course, we're into the second round of nominations now. We're looking for 150 nominations from across Canada, and you can nominate every single one of us if you want to. But the link is on the homepage of my website as well. And we're always looking for donations. As you know, there's another $20,000 that we're raising, and we do need to raise money to run the campaign as well. So there's lots to do there. Love the opportunity. If you follow me on social media, that would be great. And reach out if you want a private conversation. I'm available as long as I have time to do that going forward. And just love the opportunity to meet and speak with more Greens all across Canada. Thank you so much again, Ron, for being the host tonight. Thank you, Jean-Luc Cook, for the invitation, and everybody who's here. I don't have all your names in front of me, but thank you all for coming. And I look forward to working with you on many different projects for the Green Party throughout the coming years.
Thank you so much, Judy, for participating tonight. And thank you to Jean-Luc for organizing this series of webinars to allow us to meet all of the leadership candidates. This is the third in a series. The next one is coming up tomorrow night with Amita Kuttner. Look at your emails for the invite link for that particular session. But Judy, really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for answering all of our questions. And I look forward to seeing you again online, but perhaps in the future in person.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much. Yes, this has been very interesting for all of us having to go virtual. I think there's some things about how we're doing things this year we will keep, but there's still nothing like having the meet and greets and meeting people in person. I'm looking forward to when we can do that once again.
Excellent. Well, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.